Welcome, everyone, to the Data Discourse podcast, where we focus on practical digital forensics and e-discovery insights. My name is Pete Mansmann, one of the founders of Precise Discovery, LLC. I've been assisting lawyers since 2000 in a multitude of litigation support areas. I'm excited to get started on season 2 of Data Discourse, where we will be bringing in guest speakers who we feel have interesting services and stories to share with our listeners. Today's episode will focus on how social media discovery intersects with digital forensics and e-discovery. Today's episode is titled Unlocking Open Source Intelligence, Social Media Discovery, and Digital Forensics. And I'm excited to introduce Josh Janow, CEO of SMI Aware, a company that specializes in digging deep into social media and open source data to help legal, HR, and risk teams make smarter decisions. Before leading SMI Aware, Josh had a pretty impressive career in law and executive leadership, including running the North American division of Gate Group, a billion-dollar operation with over 10,000 employees. Throughout his career, he's been all about using data to solve big problems and drive better business decisions. Josh, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Pete. Really happy to be here.
So Josh, Precise and SMI have a history going back many years at this point. We're both Pittsburgh-based companies, or have been Pittsburgh-based companies over time. And the way we became aware of your company years ago was that a lot of our clients who tend to be litigation attorneys, insurance attorneys, attorneys that are dealing with some type of investigation or litigation would come to us and say, hey, I need social media as part of their collection, their forensic analysis, investigation, whatever it might be, to prepare for potential litigation. So that's how we came familiar with SMI. And I know from years past that a lot of times the social media aspect of it just sort of got lumped in with computer forensics, and everybody thought this was something that could be done with a software program. And early on, in at least my experience, a lot of that was how it was done. There was a few platforms that were out there that would people would go to, forensics folks in particular, and collect social media data and profiles and things like that. But certainly we recognized very quickly how fast that area was expanding, changing, and how just gathering data through some software means was not the solution to this ever evolving issue of collecting social media. So that's how we became aware of SMI back in the day and started recommending our clients to your company, saying, hey, you should use these folks to do that portion of your case. So with that background, I know you've come into the SMI family within the last 3 or 4 years. Is that accurate? Can you tell us a little more about your background?
Yeah. First, let me acknowledge, even though we're a remote workforce today, we're still very much a Pittsburgh company. Where you started out is very much the center of gravity for our organization. But we did move virtually as sort of a result of COVID, and for an organization of our size, which is quite small, it's worked quite well for us, and we're able to use technology to make that basically an enduring part of our business. I came to SMI about 18 months ago. I think you ended about asking about me, so maybe I'll start telling you my story, and then
Sure.
maybe we can overlap it with the story of SMI Aware, which is I think pretty interesting. But you highlighted my history correctly. The very beginning of my career was as a paralegal in big law. Went to law school at night and became an attorney in big law in Washington, D.C. at Waugh. After several years of doing that, went in-house to a client, which was Gate Gourmet or Gate Group, and spent 15 years there, and went from being in-house counsel to general counsel, then moved over to the commercial side, was a commercial leader, and then was running the North American division. And across those 15 years, I moved myself and my family around their network as I continued to support the organization. So I had the good fortune of spending a chapter in Toronto and in London, England, and Atlanta, and then came full circle back home, which is Reston, Virginia, in the DC suburbs. So I get to drive when we go up to Pittsburgh, which I do regularly, across the entirety of Pennsylvania. I never had done that drive before, but I'm a regular on it. There's a lot of ruralness between here and there. It's pretty interesting.
Well, you're going the wrong way first. You should cut through Maryland.
I do cut through Maryland. But but I go up through Frederick but I don't cut over. You think the way to go is like through Deep Creek or something like that?
Yeah, through Deep Creek. That's the fastest route and avoids all that crazy DC traffic.
Interesting. Okay, I have to map it through Deep Creek. I haven't ever gone all the way out that way. Yeah, I guess it
Off
depends.
topic,
Maybe that.
but that's it.
Yeah, that's probably a summertime. But that's the good thing about podcasts is you don't have to 100% be on message. Yeah,
Right.
that's probably
Right.
a summertime drive. That's probably not a wintertime drive.
Fair enough.
All right. So you got me off topic. So that's sort of my career history, and what brought me to SMI is one, data centricity has always been something that I found interesting in my career. From being a junior attorney and getting advice from a partner that facts always trump the law, that like stuck with me. That was sort of something that got put in my ear, now more than 20 years ago. And then seeing in the business context that, a lot of times when you're solving any type of problem, forget about if it's a legal problem, but it also applies to a legal problem, you start hypothesizing and you ask all these what ifs. And if you could get anchored by some key facts, man, the problem solving becomes way easier and you don't have to speculate. And I saw when I came across SMI Aware that I had never been like a client or anything like that. It just really clicked for me, kind of how you were telling the story, that you can gather these data points and bring it into your discovery and just animate information that you already have in a much more useful way. So I sort of believe in the power of what we do, and also believe that it will have staying power, because as AI becomes more and more useful of a tool in the legal space, I think there'll still be a ton of value for the work that we do, because it'll be an input that helps ground the more complicated AI activities that will be done in the legal. So
So
that's kind of where I come from. But sorry, go ahead, Pete.
no, I was going to say it's interesting because I think you mentioned that you'd never been a client of SMI prior to joining, correct?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
So how did you become associated with the company? Were you recruited, or did you come across the company in some other fashion?
Yeah. Let me start with a little bit of the history on the company, and then I'll dovetail an answer to your question. But the company's been around for about a dozen years, and the original business case was around. It was more in the pre-employment space, and so we were asked originally to help support pre-employment to screen for a reality TV show and to do the potential participants. And at that time, a dozen years ago, they realized that there was a bunch of information that was out there, but they didn't get their hands on. They didn't know how to get their hands on it, and it was highly relevant to their risk assessment. And so we built our application around that idea. And it was about 6 or 7 years ago that we pivoted and focused on the legal community. And now we're predominantly supporting the legal community. We have occasional pre-employment or HR related requests, but predominantly it's around the legal community. And that the activity that we do is really the same underlying process we do for either of those types of requests. We get the scope and then we do the activity. I came to SMI Aware. I guess I'd say it in this view that I was being data centric on how I approach my life. So I didn't know them from Adam, and when I decided I wanted to have a new, distinct chapter in my professional career, and I wasn't really sure specifically what that would want to be, I was doing broad-based sourcing of what that could be. So I was taking a very data-centric approach, going from a non or barely user of LinkedIn to a super user of LinkedIn, learning, cross-referencing all the different ways that my professional life and the skill sets that I've built could be applied, and getting out there. And through all of that, I met the founder, Chris Randall. And we both quickly realized the affinity there of bringing together commercial acumen that I had as a time, my business leadership, and then my legal background. because as you probably well know, selling into the legal community is challenging because your client base generally rates very, very highly on a
Right.
skepticism profile. They have a lot of questions for you, rightly so. And so it's hard to make that consultative sale to this community, even when they need the service. And
Yeah.
so all of that kind of was my strong suit. And so that's kind of how, so it was a bit of hustle and serendipity. And then thankfully, Chris and I saw eye to eye on what the potential was and the opportunity to come in.
Yeah, it's interesting that you took that turn and landed on this company because I think what SMI does is fascinating to me. Again, I'm coming at it from a different perspective where, we're often engaged with litigators who are investigating an accident or something along those lines. And so they're trying to gather information. And, I'm not a social media user. I just haven't been. And, other than LinkedIn, that's probably the only thing I really use a whole lot. So I understand it, but at the same time, the psychology of it, I'm not quite as in tune with because I'm not there all the time. But I certainly have seen over the years that the amount of data being created and the idea of social media and the concept of what does that mean and where do you go to look and with the advent of AI and things coming in, so quickly, that target is moving so fast that you really need experts to guide you on what you should even be considering to look at or considering to go after. It's not a push a button and collect a few things. I think we talked about this previously that back I'm going back probably 10 years ago at this point, you probably could have gone to 3 platforms and caught 90% of people's social media profile. And maybe that's still the case. You can catch a lot of it to a few, but there's so many more platforms that are out there, and it's ever changing that's always become the challenge. And I've found that whole area so interesting. I can certainly see why that's been a growth for the company and servicing along those lines. So you said in mid 2000s or so, you did a pivot, or SMI did a pivot more towards litigation. What's that? Would you break down the typical types of engagements that you're involved with? Is there, are you leaning towards more of one over another?
Yeah, I would say things where you can imagine the information that you would find on social media being relevant to the case. So, where there's a physical aspect of the case where we can find the representations online. So, personal injury cases, class action cases, employment matters, those are probably our most common ones. But then when you get into credibility assessments of an individual, that basically opens it up to every type of litigation.
Right.
And so we have a good number of our clients that sort of take that type of approach. And so anytime you're taking or defending a deposition, for example, it basically is a no regrets move to do this type of activity. If you're at the point in your case where you're choosing to take a deposition, you're at the point in your case where you've created a budget and are expecting to spend a material amount of money to resolve this case. At that point, essentially using a service like ours to support that deposition is very, very marginal. So it becomes a no regrets move. In fact, not doing it, whether it's our service or on your own, you have to question whether you're hitting the diligence standard for professionalism if you don't do it. But we also get it at the very, very beginning of the cases as well, because it's a very helpful early case assessment tool, and it's a very helpful, essentially IT overview assessment tool. And this may be where it interplays with what you all do, because I don't know. Maybe I need to ask you this question because I don't have it perfect in my mind. Sort of the view between what's forensic activity and not forensic activity. But we do our searches in the category of OSINT, so open source intelligence. So I view that, and maybe you view it differently, as a complement or to forensic activity. Forensic activity is usually more complicated, more time intensive, more cost intensive. And so I very much see us as a pre-forensic activity, because a lot of what you can do at the very beginning is see what a user is using, beyond, independent of their company issued sites. And so when we talk about social media, absolutely the bread and butter of what we collect is what you're talking about: Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, X, and the like. But there's a long, long tail. We actually query 588 sites, I believe, right now. So about 600 sites. It's sort of ever changing. And in that tail, there's a lot of stuff, like stuff.
Right.
It's big, but it basically means that you can create a username and profile and create content. So things that sit in that tail are things like Strava, for example. So you say you're not a social media user, but if you're on a fitness app and you're writing you think about your activity, if you're recording it, that means you're writing it, you're creating content, and you have a username profile, you're creating content, and you have privacy settings, which most people don't know what the heck they've set on that. So some of those places, if you do an online search, I might be able to see where you ran yesterday.
Yep. Yep.
That might be interesting. It tells you where you were and when, and it tells you what you were doing. So in things like personal injury, that could be interesting. But even if the running doesn't even matter, if I'm running a complex discovery thing and I'm trying to build a aggregated timeline, I'm using a whiz bang AI tool to do that. If I have one more data point that I can give you, that Pete was in Youngstown, Ohio on March 4th, running 10K at 2 in the afternoon. Well, that might be interesting to animate the timeline because there might be an inconsistency in the story you're telling about something that has nothing to do with the running. And so those are the types of things that come out.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned the jogging, because we had that exact case at one time. So if we back up to where I think the intersection of what we do in computer forensics crosses over in some of what you do, or where the two complement each other, oftentimes where we're involved on the computer forensics side is mobile device collection and analysis. And in mobile collection, device, and analysis, just like in social media, we're looking at, where people have been when, what are they posting, what are they saying. It tends to be a more fluid and honest reflection of what's going on. They're not as cautious as they might put things in an email. So the mobile collection for us becomes sort of a gateway into what's happening with people at any point in time in their life, because we're also tethered to our mobile devices. Oftentimes the mobile device will also tell us, this person seems to be active in these social media aspects because they have the apps on their phones. But we typically won't have access to that data because the phone's not keeping it. But just like you mentioned that jogging case, we had something very similar where it was a question of a lady had been killed by a truck coming down the road, and the truck driver said, she ran right out in front of me. Well, she was a jogger and she jogged the same route every day for 2 years or whatever it was. And we were able to show, based on that jogging data, that she took the same route all the time. The idea that she jumped out immediately in front of somebody just randomly that one day was unlikely. And that information became very valuable to settling that case. So that's where I think some crossover and intersections of what you do and what we do come into play. We'll oftentimes be able to say, we know these people are active in these areas, but the devices we have access to don't contain the critical information. You need somebody to go investigate it and see if it lives out there.
Yeah, I think that's a good example, and it shows sort of the intersectionality of it, because if you take your mobile device example, you're going to learn things in there that will scope the query that you might ask of me.
Right.
And I'm gonna if I go first, I'm gonna learn things in that output that will scope the query that you can do. And so there are different ways to go about it. They both have value. Probably is fact dependent on the case on how you want to do the ordering of what comes first. But both of those are probably an easier path, or even in together, than there's more formal ways as well, right? You could subpoena Meta.
Right.
It's possible. I mean, there are certain cases where that's the right approach, but that's a more burdensome way to do it. So there's different ways to collect this stuff. I think for me, it's very clear to me that doing the forensic stuff on a cell phone, is part of modern practice. And it's
Right.
very clear to me that doing these well-tailored OSINT searches with a focus on social media should be part of modern practice too, because they're at a price point that it's hard to say like it's too burdensome to do.
Well, and I imagine we both have the same issue, which is you can get a lot of data. And so it's not something you can just turn over to somebody and say, well, here it is. You have to help interpret it, point them to things that are potentially more valuable or interesting to them based upon what they've explained the cases about. I know that always comes into play on the forensic side. And I would assume you run across something similar in the work that you guys do? Is it a lot of data that you can potentially collect or look at, and you have to sort of boil it down into what's potentially useful?
Yeah, we have two core products. So one is called a deep report, and there how we're able to curate it down to what's relevant is we work with the clients on the front end in tailoring a scope that makes sense. So we try to get out of them, what are you really interested in? And so the deep report is going across all 600-ish sites and then pulling the stuff that hits the scope parameters. So it's curating based on relevance, and embedded in it is a copy of the screenshot and the source code data, two separate files that are embedded that can be pulled out. So if you ever need it for evidentiary purposes, that trail is there for you. We provide an affidavit at the end, and those three things tend to work for the vast majority. That's, to me, we're looking for relevance. When I think about things from a preservation perspective, we do something called an export, and that's when you know the URL you're looking for, and you capture that URL against just a time parameter. So you're not curating it for relevance. And we sell them together. We call them as a bundled report, where you do essentially a deep report plus the top three findings you immediately export. So we do that kind of stuff regularly as well, but that's how we find the balance. So occasionally someone will come and they'll already know that they want the URL, so we'll just do the export. But mostly we're doing the deep report or the deep report plus three exports up front. And lawyers tend to appreciate it because it's kind of the belt and suspenders approach. You know, they get their curated content, but they've also preserved even more, because the reality is that this stuff is out there. Even when there's a technical obligation to preserve, it's not in the control of any, like, it's thought of differently still.
Right.
So compliance with that is still uncertain. Forget about bad actors, just like average actors,
Right.
without giving it much thought. Compliance with the preservation obligations are uncertain. I guess you have risks that the platforms themselves might choose to do something different of that, which probably was less of a risk 18 months ago when I just started. But when you see, things like the potential TikTok ban, or you see, that we're in a very dynamic moment, and the people that control, Meta or X and stuff like this, they might make major changes to their platforms. It's just a commercial agreement that is subject to their choice to change it. So, it's like kind of a bird in the hand, and you need to do the preservation.
Well, and I think that what you just mentioned there is part of the reason why a software only solution it's never going to keep up. They're all changing their platform so regularly, for their own purposes, that you're not going to be able to rely on something that's going to be able to consistently and constantly connect to all these sources, let alone help you dive through it in a meaningful way. I think it really turns out to be more of a service than anything else.
The platforms like to hold their content and control it, and I think that'll continue. That's where they make their money. And so being able to take a targeted view like we do is consistent with their sort of community standards and their platforms, versus like this aggregated view. So I think they'll continue to build and develop their applications to limit the aggregated view. So that's one thing. The other thing is that the fully automated tools, and we build automation into our system so that we become more efficient. But the fully automated tools today tend to leave you with something that's over-inclusive and under-inclusive at the same time. And what I mean by that is that if they're automating searching, they're giving you basically a list of URLs. So it'll not just be your handles, but they'll catch other people's handles that are similar to yours, like other Pete Mansmans,
Right.
right? And so it'll leave more work to do, and so it'll be over inclusive in that way. It'll be also over inclusive because they won't curate the data based on the relevancy parameter. That tends to be a mix of human interaction and automation. And then it'll be under inclusive because they won't go the extra mile to try to find your hard to find accounts. And that is both finding like alias accounts, the Finsta accounts of the world, but also finding the hard to find accounts that sit outside of the core social media platforms. So that long, long tail I was talking about.
And you said that's at this point is over 500 different platforms that you guys are regularly searching through.
Yeah, and it constantly changes because the tools that we use sort of are perpetually updating. A lot of that stuff you're just finding a username. Some of them they're also public information, but that username is very very valuable because it allows formal discovery to follow. If you can specify in a litigation hold that you need to hold at this thing, that's helpful. And if you can ask for formal discovery around it, it's a much better question than any online platforms you may use. Because the reality is most people come to it kind of like how you presented yourself. I don't really use social media. And then
Right.
all of a sudden, if you can say this, this, and this, you might say, oh yeah, I do have a Calendly.
Right.
Oh,
Right.
I do have a Flickr account. Oh, I do use Venmo. And okay, so
Right.
what's there? And then, because I mean, the stuff in the public news, in the political sphere of these many many cases where statement A is made about a lack of knowledge about something, and then someone, not us, but someone else does these deep research online and finds points that connect individuals that basically counteract the statements, or finds like scandalous stuff that the person had posted.
And it almost sounds like the word social media, either need to think of it in the broadest terms if it's more of a online footprint, or as you're using open source, it's that the idea that the digital breadcrumbs you leave out there can be in a lot of different places, and it doesn't have to be somewhere where you post a comment or take a picture of your food.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, we do a general web search as part of our service, so probably using social media to promote ourselves in a way is overly narrow. It's just a much more understandable like structure than if I was trying to sell OSINT.
Right. Right. That's a little bit harder to put on the marketing brochure.
Yeah.
So you mentioned something I'd like to touch base on because I know this is important. Authentication. So in any litigation, at some point, if you plan on using it, you are likely going to be held to some authentication standard. Where'd you get this? Is it reliable, et cetera? I think you mentioned that on some of your reporting, you provide an affidavit, which would certainly help on that issue. But can you talk about when you're doing some of your deep dive or deep reports? Are there other ways you authenticate data that allows it to be usable?
That's the main way. So our deep report is generally seen as like attorney work product. The pieces of data that sit within the deep report can get pulled out, and those are the things that can become evidence. And so far in our history, it's every time one of our clients wants to use something that we found in evidence, the screenshot plus the source code data plus an affidavit affirming our collection techniques have been sufficient to introduce it into it. Where it probably has to be passed over to folks like your organization, and maybe you can bring some light to this, is when there's a dispute to what the underlying thing is. So I might be able to say that this screenshot came from, at Pete Mansmann's, Facebook account. But if you are saying that someone hacked my account or I didn't post that,
Right.
then that's a different type of dispute, sort of beyond what we do. And that would, I assume, and maybe you bring light to it, like some sort of forensic intelligence that would have to complement what we've already done. But those things people like to bring up as hypotheticals, in the actual use of the evidence that we found, we haven't hit that yet.
No, I think that largely mirrors what we see in the forensics world. Certainly, that oftentimes we are reporting upon best techniques and professional standards about how things are done, and that we're explaining how data was collected, analyzed, et cetera, so that it's explained to a level that somebody can question it if they need to. But when we get into individual data pieces, then we're getting into hash valuing and different things like that that can show you, hey, maybe it's a question somebody says, I never posted that picture on my Facebook, it was hacked. But if we find that photo on their phone and can say it's the same photo, it has the same metadata, hash values, et cetera, that that might be the piece of evidence that just shows it's unlikely that what they're saying is true. So I think that's probably an intersection where the two may tie into each other if it's an important piece of information.
Yeah, I think that's right. And those, so there are times that you need beyond what we do, but they're kind of limited to very fact specific things where you sort of, there's an allegation that hacking occurred, or I didn't do this, AI did that, or you're trying to understand what the underlying thing is. But we confirm that the thing was posted on this site at this time, and that's what we're able to authenticate.
Right. And most of whether it's deposition testimony or other is asking someone the question. And oftentimes, if they know that you have an answer or you have some evidence that's going to push them in the direction of truth, that's as valuable as the piece of evidence itself.
Yeah.
So if you kind of know what's happening, that's important. Could you give, just as an example, let's say a personal injury attorney comes to you, whether they're defending the case or they're the plaintiff's attorney on the case, and they want to do an investigation on somebody. What's Just walk through the process of how they engage with you and kind of what steps you take, what information you need, how long it typically takes for you to turn something around to them.
Yeah. So first, when it's a brand new client, we provide like the white glove service and try to make sure that they have every piece of training needed so that they can work and provide us with requests for reports without our interaction. So we have a web-based platform, SOX 2 compliant, and they make their queries directly there. So I'm going to assume that this hypothetical that you gave is someone that uses this regularly. And when they use this regularly, they come to our platform. We have several prompts to make sure we're getting the personally identifying information that's helpful to do the search. And then we have an open field that asks for the scope. And all of our clients that use us regularly understand that, and they just write a human being's going to read it, so it's not so much a technical thing, and you just write really what you're looking for. So it's a basic recitation of the case, how this individual relates to the case, and what their hypothesis is. So what the type of things are that they're looking for, and it can be narrow or it can be broad. And that will be the prompt that our analyst takes to go and find that information. In terms of a timeline, we do standard 2 business day turnaround. So we're taping here on Wednesday. So yeah, if an order is coming in right now as we're taping, it'll be turned around by the close of business on Friday.
That's great. So it's quick. It's really, again, with cost considerations. To your point, if you're at the stage where you're taking depositions, and it's a witness that has any value to the case, starts to get to the point to say, why wouldn't you be doing this type of investigation?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, we're coming in at under a billable hour is sort of the cost. How I express it to attorneys, depending on the law firm, it might be under a billable hour for a non-attorney support researcher as well. And we're spending over an hour on the activity, even with the automation. And there's a lot of variety on how this would take if you didn't have the automation. So it's kind of counterfactual in a way, but certainly anecdotally, we hear from people that have turned to us versus doing it internally. That a lot of these take more than a day of research, especially when they go deep down the rabbit holes.
And when they do their own research, I know the concern, and there's, you know, hundreds of CLEs out here about this, that you can't friend request people, and you have to be concerned about what settings are available to what data you can access. Can you talk about that a little bit, about how you maintain ethical guidelines around what you're seeing and collecting against, giving meaningful research back?
Yeah. So, attorneys have an obligation not to contact counterparties except through their counsel when they're represented by counsel. And so accidental contacts through these social media platforms is very possible if you're an untrained user. So that's kind of one big issue that gets resolved if you use an outside service provider where you're going to get to the professional level versus having someone else that's a general researcher now provide this type of activity. We have very strong rules to make sure that we're not creating content when we're going in. So we use what are called alias accounts. And within those alias accounts, we work very hard to comply not just with like the ethical standards of the legal community, but also the community standards of the platform itself. So platforms generally have very limited permitted reasons to have alias accounts, and so we stay within those permitted reasons. And then that really avoids the accidental contacts. And then the other thing that a lot of firms haven't thought through until they come into contact with an organization like ours is that the way beyond the accidental contacts, they don't fully appreciate that the way they're asking their research to be done is they're asking colleagues to use their personal Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn accounts to do this business work. So they probably have a social media use policy that prohibits the activity that they're now directing their employee to do. So it also helps avoid or maintain, let me say, compliance with their own company policies, whether the company's a law firm or the company itself. Because you generally, most of them, when they thought about it, would strongly disfavor people doing that type of activity on a non-work device.
And I would imagine, just in dealing with lawyers in general, that I think I can fairly say that they're not the most technically adept people at all times. I think most lawyers would admit that. I would imagine as well that lawyers who are sort of doing their own research along these lines are typically going to be looking for what comment did somebody post, what picture did they post, that type of stuff, and maybe less so aware of the data points and the breadth of where important information may live, whether it's in, a platform that they're not even thinking about that is critical to potentially, making a point on their case. And I don't know if you've come across any of that experience where someone's come to you and said, we've looked, we haven't found anything or whatever, and then you sort of turned up some of these things that it's just outside their purview of what they were even considering.
Yeah, I mean, some of it is the luck of the draw, or it's all dependent on what content actually someone creates and posts. But there's many cases where most of the time you're doing this because you're being diligent, so you're not sure what to expect. But there's many times that what you get back is something that is certainly gets on the key evidence list. It's something that becomes key. So out of the million of data points that you're collecting in terms of discovery, this is hitting that top tier list. And that's when people become converts and do this all the time, because they realize that it's over indexed at the price point to bring back relevant data.
Right. Well, and I know your runway with SMI has been approximately 18 months at this point, but in that 18 months, have you experienced that the sort of requests that you get have changed? Are they typically the same, or are people sort of leaning in towards, different types of data that they're looking for? Have you noticed any trends in your time with SMI to see how people are starting to recognize that the landscape has changed?
Yeah, I think as time passes, and certainly as we're pushing more and more into the market and trying to promote ourselves, the aha moment is becoming much more common. And it's probably a mix of us and others like that are in this field doing the good work of explaining why this is necessary. And then on the other side, it's sort of like the industry as a whole becoming much every year or time every period becoming much more recognizing that there's always these new tools And probably like the AI push has created a halo effect that helps people look at automated solutions or smart solutions that maybe they wouldn't have given time to focus on. I think there's a my general feeling is that over the last 18 months, that the legal community has moved from being like, all these innovations are something that like my innovation leader needs to handle, to now saying like, if I don't come become knowledgeable, I run a risk of falling behind. And
Yeah.
so it's really like the what about me became a lot more important for these lawyers, and therefore I think there's much more space to listen to services like we have.
Yeah, and from prior conversations that the whole AI arena and where things are potentially going to go and how fast the landscape is changing is a hot topic in my brain. And you know, as simple as using ChatGPT and showing attorneys out there to be like, did you know it could do X, Y, and Z? And almost every single one has said no. And then you show them a few things and they're like, oh my God, it can do that, it can do this. And so that aha moment that I think you just described is very quick when you see the power of some of these tools in their infancies, I think, in terms of how it's being implemented into the legal field. And concurrently with that, everyone hears the horror stories of, hallucinated, case citations and lawyers getting sanctioned and going into court with information that's incorrect. And there has to have to be balancing act about what you're relying on AI for. But at least in my opinion, I think the starting point for a lot of this is going to be you have lots of data or you have a lot of information to digest. There's nothing wrong with asking AI to tell you, where should I look first? Or what, based upon what I'm feeding you, what are some things I should be thinking about creatively without saying, give me a case citation where you can get yourself in trouble. And I think that's probably going to be, from my perspective, on the computer forensics and e-discovery side, at least in those spaces, the area where AI is going to have the biggest impact immediately, where you're going to be able to load a medical history, for instance, in an AI based engine and say, give me a timeline of all the treatments, or tell me, anytime the doctor indicated the patient didn't follow the orders, and it's going to be able to point you there. Should you rely on that 100%? No, but it's a great starting point. And summarizing depositions and doing all those kind of things I think is going to be very powerful, where you can be creative. So I'm curious from your standpoint and what you might be able to offer to the audience listening, where you think AI is going to be impactful in the work that SMI does and the things that you see in the legal field and your background just in general. Like where do you see this going and where do you see it happening first?
Um, okay, so I'll get out my crystal ball and we can have the AI conversation. I really enjoy this topic because it's super interesting. It's speculative. I'm pretty bullish that it'll have profound changes, and how that all sorts out. A little bit time will tell, and it has huge like social, like societal implications as well. But if let's maybe we stick to legal work for a second. It's clear to me that the large language models are just becoming better and better and better. In my 18 months here, I've just seen how they've improved, and I'm just like an active user, sort of as a hobbyist, because I just find it fascinating. In the legal setting, there's a lot of companies that are trying to bring AI agents to the legal market or build in AI tools into their platforms. I think the best tools are the ones that have the right mix of good training and then good grounding. And the good grounding is kind of what you're talking about the closed packet facts or information set
Right.
to help that AI agent focus on something. So when you highlight the hallucinations and citing fake case law, there are or will be case law digest providers that will create that closed packet for their agent to effectively remove the falsification and get it to an accuracy level that is equal to or greater than a strong professional attorney. Which means that, like, if it gets to the level of like the 95 percentile of attorney quality, then all of a sudden, all these attorneys that are below that have a way to become that good.
Right.
And they can do it fast, and everyone will do it faster. On the fact analysis side, we always talk about how the data that we collect, it can be an edge piece or a corner piece of the puzzle. You'll hardly ever be able to solve the entire fact puzzle by doing a social media search, but you might be able to find that edge piece. And if you bring that edge piece into your data set that is grounding your AI technology, it becomes more valuable. So timeline creation is something that I've seen in legal conferences as being like one of the typical promotions of like the immediate value of AI today. We will make that AI agent that's doing timeline creation for you on your case more valuable because we'll have time points put in. And then it's bringing in the ocean of data that's open source, and we're getting a very refined data piece, and we're bringing it into the closed data set that's grounding the activity. So the entire discovery corpus of information is what these AI agents are going to go against. And if you can bring the sliver of open source information into this closed source space, it just becomes better. So I don't ever expect to build my own AI tool for my customers, but I expect my customers to want to use my data in their AI tools. And then on the other end, I do expect that what I can cover in terms of quality in my reports, or maybe even segmentation of my reports, will evolve because I might be able to use AI as an input tool. And potentially the speed at which I can do it might change because I can use it as an input tool. But I always think there'll still be a human in the loop. I'll just be able to remove some of their like it becomes, value. The value added activity that they will provide will evolve, but it'll never go away. And so that's kind of how I see it going. The last thing I would say is that I think the broader push towards AI will help uncover new automation opportunities in a lot of spots. So I think a lot of stuff that's being marketed as AI is we went out and tested AI, and through that test, we had to define our process to such an extent that I learned how to automate it.
Right.
And I think that there'll be a lot of those opportunities in our space as well. So it may not be an AI solution, but the AI question is driving solutions through AI and non-AI automation methods.
Well, and it'll open up opportunity. Like with any disruptive change in society, I think the first reaction is awe, and then probably closely followed behind is fear, because a lot of people see that, wait a minute, that can do what I can do, but faster and at no cost. But if I use the Industrial Revolution as a sort of an analogy to this, you could say that, yeah, the Industrial Revolution put the buggy whip makers out of business, but it opened up 100 other industries that never existed before. And I think AI has the same potential to open up areas that we currently don't have. And it's just gonna have to be one of those things that it's not gonna go away unless it becomes self-aware and kills us all. But that's a different conversation. It's not going to go away. So I think it's something that there has to be a level of familiarity with. And to your point, use it within the confined constraints, especially today. That's not going to get you in trouble. I believe LexisNexis and Westlaw now have AI component engines that confine you to their own research. That's the way to do your research then. It's going to make it faster and easier to find good cases, but they're going to be making sure they have safeguards in place that it's not going to go create a case because it thinks that's what you want to hear.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And all these sites, whether it's Westlaw or Facebook or anything, they all want bona fide users that are using it consistent with how they've set themselves up. So AI is offense and defense, depending on how you want to use it. And so maybe the last thing that I'd add to this, and I don't know how this will play out, but AI will also be used to by all these large platforms to ensure that it's only being used or monetized in the way that the platform wants to be used and monetized.
Yep. Yep. I think it's here to stay. We're in an interesting time, overall, and certainly in the legal space, that I think we're going to see a lot of changes come at us quickly in the next few years. But that's a topic I could go on for hours with you, I'm sure. So Josh, as we come to the end of our podcast episode here, are there some insights or some advice you can give to our listeners out there who may consider using a service like SMIs, or just advice in general about how to consider investigations or the marriage of tool and resources like those you bring?
Yeah. I think two sort of points come to mind as closing points, Pete. First, just to put a finer point on our AI conversation, I think one thing that will still exist in a more matured AI world is keeping humans in the loop. And I think that will exist both for lawyers. So lawyers will still have a role, an important role. And ultimately, all this data that's now at people's fingertips still has to be communicated out and put into context. And so I think lawyers will continue to rely on organizations like ours that will continue to have a human in the loop, even as we become more and more efficient and more effective through AI enhancements. So it's still, to me, it's still about that, because there's going to be just way more information out there. So understanding how to have the right information at the right place at the right time still becomes core, and that means that the human in the loop has to exist. In terms of right place and right time, the second point I would bring is, like, there's an incredible value to getting your hands on this information earlier in your case. And there's almost no downside to it. There's an incremental cost, but it's really marginal. And at the time that you are, before you're filing a complaint, before you're making a letter writing campaign, if you can collect this type of data to supplement the early data you already have for a case assessment, you're going to be more powerful. And then if you believe in that, you believe in all the moments downstream that you can do it. And you can always rerun reports or monitor sites. So in my view, it is almost a no regrets move for the vast majority of cases. And I know this data is sort of hard to get your fingers on, and I don't exactly know which is the best data to use as a proxy for this, but there's something like 40 million cases filed every year in the United States. There's something like 10 million depositions taken every year in the United States. There's no way there's 10 million of these reports being done every day in the United States. And it's hard to fathom, if you're taking or defending a deposition, why you wouldn't want to get your hands on this information to better prepare your witness, or potentially to ask the witness questions in topics that you might not already have in your deposition prep. So I just think there's a lot more education that has to come so that people see this as the no regrets move and call on organizations like ours to help them.
Or sometimes the result is, hey, you didn't find anything that's juicy that they need to be worried about, and that can be valuable as well.
Yeah, that too is comfort. I mean, at least you know you're being diligent, that you're hitting the minimum diligence standard, that you're hitting levels of professionalism that you carry yourself as an attorney. And so, yeah, that comfort is hugely valuable. And so the 10 million number is depositions. Imagine if you bring it forward to the earliest parts of your case, and that's going to come up with an even bigger number. Because if there's 40 million cases that are filed, how many cases are threatened and then resolved before filing? It has to be a bigger number.
Well, I hope you hit that 10 million mark.
Thank you, Pete. Yeah, thank you. I take those well wishes. I appreciate it.
Well, Josh, we're at the end of our hour here, and I really appreciate your time, your thoughts, your insight into this. Can you let the listeners know how they can get in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So SMIaware.com is our website, and that's the easiest way to get in touch with us. I'm a regular poster on LinkedIn as well. I have a pretty unique name. You can look me up on LinkedIn. It won't be too hard to find me either. And you can write to me there as well. And then I'm happy to talk to people. And if you have interest in our service, happy to explore that with you guys. It's really easy to get started. We sell our reports by the report to get started. So we try to make the startup costs like near zero. So check us out and really see how we can impact positively your practice.
And so for everybody, just to make sure they have it, that's SMI Aware, SMIAWARE.com, correct?
That is correct. Thank you, Pete.
All right. Well, thanks again for joining us. I really appreciate everything we had a chance to talk through today. I'd invite our listeners to check in for the next episode coming up. We're actually going to be talking AI again, but more along the lines of being able to determine whether or not information being collected forensically and used in the e-discovery space is fabricated by AI, or if it's original and legitimate and authenticated. So it's going to be another interesting conversation with the guest speaker. So thank you again for joining us, and we'll talk to everybody we'll be listening with everyone on the next episode of Data Discourse. Thank you.